Thank you.
Yep. Good morning, panel. My name is Rob Woods. I'm representing myself, of course, but also a number of, I guess, tour operators up here have expressed a little bit of interest and possibly concern about the fracking industry up here. We run a small business, tourism operation up here. It's a family-based business, and we've been doing so for 4 years now. This is our 4th season, and we run typically across the top end. So,
again, just so we know, which organisations are you here on behalf of, or businesses?
Just a number of tourism operators. So small family operators, and the number's pretty much growing as we speak now. So as the I guess awareness for the fracking gets out there amongst the tourism operators, people are actually just calling up and saying, "Listen, can we get involved in this?" So,
thank you, sir. I promise I won't interrupt again. I just want to be clear.
Yeah,
thank
please,
you. Yes,
please
go ahead, please.
So yeah, basically, firstly, guys, I would like to say thank you to all of you actually being here and actually going to the trouble of doing the inquiry. I know it's your job, but obviously it's an essential part, I think, of the Northern Territory and sustainable development up here. So thank you for that. I've said I'm a tourism operator up here. This is the busy season, so we've tried to have a bit of a good look at the report that you guys put out. And today, if you don't mind, I've got a few questions, a couple of comments on the interim report, and also a few responses from some of the members in the industry in which we work. In giving you our responses, I sort of do feel that a longer period between the interim report and the submission time would have been pretty handy. So
thank you, noted.
Yep. And also the timing, just with the release. Obviously, you're doing the report now, right in the middle of the busy season. So I know a lot of the other operators and business people up here are, hands to the grindstone trying to keep afloat. So just for future. That being said, I've looked at your report, and if you don't mind, I just want to make sure we're on the same path as far as what I understand it to be and what you guys know it to be, in regards to the industry up here. And if you... Oh, there we go. Okay, so just a couple of slides. Oh, there you go. So just a few slides up there, and so please do stop me if any of these slides appear wrong or outdated or anything like that. But just from the tourism perspective, we're looking at the Northern Territory up there and looking at how much that landscape is actually either under application or been approved for fracking exploration. That's what we're sort of concerned about. And these are the figures that we sort of got off from that. So 85% of the Northern Territory undergrounded, 40% of permits already approved. There are currently no reservations for national parks, community living areas, natural or cultural regions of significance, or surface and groundwater resources. Now, I understand that's in the report. As I said, and correct me if any of that's wrong, please. And just once again, stepping back a bit further, these numbers, I think, are quite high, but I think that's probably let's say, the most optimistic from a gas perspective, I think. And just looking at those, we're talking about just over 12,000 wells in Amadeus, was that 28,000 in Georgina, and the rest up there. So that's from where we stand in the tourism industry. That looks fairly intensive. So once again, please correct those figures when we get a chance later on. So just looking at the fracking and I guess the basics of it, what I took out of the report was basically during the drilling and fracking, in regards to how it's going to impact on tourism, possibly concentration of heavy equipment, thousands of trucks movement per well site over several months, cement covered fencing to keep livestock away, completion. We're just interested to know about the need to maintain those structures and those sites, the period and who would be responsible for that, and of course the cost. Of course, well integrity issues, we realise that there's only been one blowout, but only one seems like a lot. And of course, we know that technology apparently is improving and limiting that. But what happened after that blowout? What was the consequences? What was the procedures for fixing that up? And how did the industry respond when that occurred? We'd be interested to know that, just to set some sort of baseline on their response that they showed before the inquiry. Looking at the production times, 20 to 50 years, indefinite period of monitoring, maintenance, 20 to 50 years, wastewater production, each well, 20 megalitres of water. Obviously, the water is the main issue up here, and that's one of the things we'll be sort of talking about or asking questions about in a second. And of course, what to do with that water once it comes back up. As we are out in the environment and tourism out there all the time, any change or contamination to surface water, groundwater, and the soil affects everything that we do. That's it. And of course, re-injection, out of mind, out of sight, it's not going to work up here apparently, and that's according to your report. So what do you do when you've got such large distances and such high demand or high need for water? How do you bring it in? Where do you bring it in? And what impacts they're going to have? That's what we're really interested in. Of course, safety on the roads with these increased truck movements and everything else as well. So it has a lot of carry-on effects. Now, if we're good with that, just want to look at the executive summary. When we read this, a number of things actually stuck out to me. One of was probably a small point, but just with the movie Gasfield, I saw in that movie, and of course it was quite damning, you know, and whether or not there was questionable things in there or not, I can honestly say it's not the reason I have my position with fracking. Of course, there's a lot of emotion in that movie, but there are genuine concerns, as you highlighted in your report. And also just want to, I guess, talk about the massive bonus for the US in regards to the self-reliance and effect on world energy prices and how that was a positive. However, you know, just under that, you say that in some instances the transformation took place in jurisdictions that were poorly regulated, resulting in significant environmental damage. On the basis of that, it's that classic case of, okay, there's massive, obvious financial benefits to the industry, but what were the costs, you know, in those areas? What did the industry, as an industry, do to try and overcome that? And what have they done since to try and improve their image so that we wouldn't find ourselves in front of these inquiries? Because I think that's relevant across countries, not just in the States. And of course, with the community response that you guys received, basically, yeah, I went to a couple of these community events, and of course, yeah, you know, most people, I'm going to go out there and say 98, 99% of people that'll turn up to these community events typically aren't in favour of the fracking. And I found it interesting that you mentioned many groups and individuals have expressed the opinion to the inquiry, and I was wondering who those opinions were, who those people were, what industries they were in, were they individuals, were they working in the frack industry or the oil and gas, were they at the meetings, or did they do it in a ad hoc sort of arrangement? And I guess the interest there is that you've got people who turn up to these meetings because they've got a vested emotional interest and real interest in how things go, honest interest, I would say even, and you've got the other side of the fence, I suppose, who are more from an industry point of view, which is all about the dollars. That's the question there. And if we're talking about community involvement and response, who do you sort of take more notice of, I guess, is a personal question there, I suppose. Now, just as I said, with tourism, water, we spend a lot of time in and around the water bodies up here, mainly swimming in some of the creeks, going to the hot springs and generally having a great time. And I don't think there's a person we've taken on tour that hasn't said what an amazing place the top end is and just how special it is to actually be able to go on this water and not worry about contamination, not worry about overexploitation, and not worry about basically, you know, those things that they're getting away from everywhere else in the country. And so, yes, the two critical aspects, surface water and groundwater, how to maintain the integrity and quality of those. You know, that's the forefront of one of the question today for us. And of course, what if? You know, it's one thing to say that it's a low probability or possibility of something to occur, but then of course in your risk matrix you look at the consequences of that. Yes, they're very, very high, but very, very low probability. But what if? And I can only think about, you know, with the Fukushima disaster over there, they're talking about minute possibility of something happening, but the response to that is they almost lost control of their country. And that's a bad environmental result, which nobody could have predicted, and yet that's what occurred. So in the case of this, with our groundwater, our surface water, which is so important up here, what if we do contaminate them? What's the comeback? What's the insurance coverage that these companies have got? What's their ability to actually come in and stop, limit, fix, reverse some of these impacts? Because from what I can understand, there is no contingency plan up here. There is no contingency plan in, you know, when you contaminate the groundwater, except to sit back and wait till it flushes itself out, if it does flush itself out. So that's a concern. So the what if is a question that I'd like answered, if that's possible. And of course, looking at the land, well, as I said, you've stated in the report, and it's mentioned up there, the Northern Territory is internationally renowned for its vast and open, spectacular landscapes. Many of which have outstanding wilderness values, represent an iconic part of outback Australia, also has exceptional terrestrial biodiversity values. This is why we have World Heritage National Parks up here. And I guess right next to it, if we were going to go ahead, particularly with the Beetaloo Basin, I think it was 27,000 square kilometres or thereabouts, that sort of area, which is larger than Kakadu National Park, and which would be an interesting mix, I suppose, next to each other. But you did identify the seven main risks, and we agree with those, definitely. Landscape amenity, inappropriate planning, regional development, spread of weeds, changed fire regimes, habitat loss, and so forth. Of course, the what if to this, what if land is integrity is destroyed? And once again, goes back to what is their ability to fix, repay, and act on that. Now, also with the landscape amenity, now I know that this particular picture isn't in Australia, it's actually Dallas, Texas, and I know that the pad density here is much higher than what you'd expect or what you've predicted in your forecast.
Is that shale or coal seam gas that we're looking at?
That's shale as far as I know. Yeah, I can check that, but yeah, I believe it's shale, yeah. So basically, when I'm looking at this and from a perspective of a tourism operator and a tourist, I can't actually see anything positive in that. I can't see myself going, let's go for a flight over Central Australia, let's go to Darwin, let's go for a drive in the outback. You know, that's not what, and not only that, when I'm thinking about, you know, going for a swim, I know this is upstream or within the catchment or 10, 15, 20 kilometres down the track, how is that going to make me feel? And I've done some little surveys of the passengers I've had on the tour so far since the inner report came out, and it doesn't look good. You know, essentially nobody wants to come up and sit next to this stuff and enjoy this or even look at it. On their way through the countryside and up here. Now, of course, that's just from the amenity side of view, just from the visual sort of point of view. If we go to looking at some of the other, let's go to, let's go spread of weeds. Obviously, we do have a big problem. You identified it, gamba grass, the spread of that, fire regimes there. Obviously, the roads and cleared areas are going to create a lot easier pathways for those weeds to get through. You know, how that affects the fire regime, of course, that's an interesting one, I think, because they've done some work, obviously, out at Kakadu. The Palva fire experiment is one, where they've looked at the proper reoccurrence interval for fire and how they should actually be burning the country. And they are talking about a 3 to 4 year return cycle for fires. If you're looking at biodiversity, you're looking at carbon emissions, you're looking at 4 to 5 years. But with your recommendation to do looking at the previous 10 years, we don't think it's probably the best option to go forward with, because it's possible that the previous 10 years haven't been done in accordance with those recommendations from those experiments. So our recommendation is to do some studies in these environments, looking at what is the best fire regime down there, rather than just looking at historical processes, if you will. Looking at habitats loss and fragmentation, again, you know, feral animals, cats, a main one. Obviously cane toads, but we've got cane toads everywhere as well. The roads allow that, and also with the fragmentation is that yeah, some animals do require a certain amount of area unobstructed or unbroken, not broken up. They need that intact landscape. So I don't think this, I'm asking you guys this, is that has there been any studies done on the minimum size of intact habitat that is required by our native animals and creatures up here? If not, then I think deeming the fragmentation as low impact, I think is probably putting the cart before the horse. I think we need to look at that. As far as fauna and flora poisoning, contamination for chemical spills, that, but also, you know, with your water containment methodologies, or the way you do that. We're all aware that the Northern Territory has an abundance of bird life up here. It's a pathway for migratory birds in and out through central, west and eastern Australia. And of course, if we're talking about setting up ponds in areas that are, I guess, in usually arid environments, they may become focal points for these birds, and keeping them out of that water, I think, would be a priority, considering that looking at some of the flowback contaminants that you mentioned, like the radioactive materials and other changed elements that come out of the water, maybe in that may harm those birds. So looking at physical structures to keep the birds out, animals away from the water as well, rather than just assuming that it's going to be a low impact out there. So. All right, so one other additional risk, I guess, is number 8, which is not up there, is the legacy issue of the unconventional gas industry. Is that what time frame do we have on, You know, you've got the 20 to 50 years of production. What time frame do we have on the integrity, long-term integrity of the wells, the casing, the concrete blocks, in general, but also across the different environments that you're going to have it, whether it's you know, the tropical north or the savanna or the desert country. These are different habitats, different obviously chemistry in the water, different conditions affecting those things. And whose responsibility is it to maintain that? After which time does it pass on to the public? And at which point does the taxpayer pick up the bill? And those sorts of things. But also looking from access point of view, you know, what would be the access for people, whether it's Indigenous people or tourism operators in those areas, once this is all done and dusted. Okay, so just skipping ahead to some of the social impacts. I should have mentioned before that we're only dealing with some of the chapters or some of the risks that present in the interim report, obviously. These are the areas that are most closely related to tourism, I suppose. Just because the footprint development unconventional offshore gas industry in the Northern Territory is unknown, because there are no two communities are the same or respond to the risk and benefits associated with any such development, different ways, and what to extent these impacts can be acceptably mitigated. Just looking, you've chosen the Beetaloo Sub-Basin, and for good reason, because that's obviously where you've stated that this is where the development will probably initiate if it goes ahead. And you've also identified that it's an Indigenous population out there, which is the main population. And one thing that I've read recently about actually precautionary principle and the application of that and historical results of when the precautionary principle wasn't actually applied, was that looking at historical and related impacts, fields, influences, and applying them across to a similar situation. And what I mean by that is, yes, we can do and should do a community-based and social impact assessment in the Beetaloo community, but also look at the broader Northern Territory region across Indigenous communities where other oil and gas industries have gone into, or other, actually, even sort of mining's gone into, and what impact they've had at a social, economic and cultural level there. Because I think, given that it's the same sort of boom-bust, high impact, or take that back, a boom-bust resource industry, you may find that there could be parallels there. And so, and looking at those historic examples, it's fair, I personally think it's a fairly grim result. Now, as far directly from the tourism, okay, tourism business go gas field free. Of course, as I said, this is where some of the tourism operators are at, such as ourselves, coming to the position where we feel that it doesn't work with tourism, fracking in the territory. And just looking at the, I guess, input of tourism and mining sector and contribution to the top end's economy and employment statistics. And if you're looking at this one, of course, there's no direct value there for tourism, but we do have one there for mining, which has at about 3,299. Now that represents about 3.5% of the working population up here. And that's the financial contribution to the mining and petroleum industry. Now, once again, you can see the source here, if anyone varies that. Now, the recent projection, or I think there's a vision for the tourism industry up here is around $2.2 billion per annum as a turnover. Now, if you look at those figures up there, we're looking at about a 6.9% of the employment of the NT up there. So once again, if you're looking at tourism, if it was a competition, if we are going to have one, I know it's not, tourism employs more people than the mining industry up here. So the value there, I think, speaks for itself. Now, from a tourism operator point of view, I'll read these out. Of course, there's Petrina Erston. They've gone to the trouble of actually contributing to this, and I think they deserve to be mentioned. Our brand image as an unspoilt destination with clean flowing waterways underpins the strong growth of our industry. We are proud of the sustainable and positive contribution that the Territory's tourism sector makes to the economy and our communities. But right now, our national parks, waterways, recreational fishing and tourism icons like Uluru, Mataranka, Hot Springs, Europa River are largely surrounded by permits from fracking gas fields. We want to clearly demonstrate the concerns of our visitor base and our sector. Fracking gas fields are too big a risk to our image as a clean, green, pristine part of Australia. The only way we can have certainty on our investments, the jobs our industry supports and the long-term viability of our vibrant tourism sector is to see fracking banned. It's a fairly strong denouncement. And of course, we've got another additive here. It's traditional custodians and joint manager of Wataka National Park. Wataka, Kings Canyon National Park, saved from fracking exploration risk through emergency heritage listing application in 2016. Fracking is not compatible with territory tourism where visitors come to see a pristine environment. Our regions host many unique plants and it's a very fragile landscape. Water is critical. If companies start fracking around our national parks, they will frack all that up. Now, and of course goes on, money comes and goes, but these places, these stories they hear with the old people, if they still hear you, mine, in here, it's all lost. And that's a fairly common sentiment across the Indigenous community. Now, to nail it down, this is there's the happy family. This is what we do, small groups. We do mainly educational tours. We do try to take people out and give them an unbiased view, if you could believe that, of what's going on up here and show them just how beautiful places are and let them make their own mind up about what they should do in the future. In order to do that though, yeah, we do rely on pristine environments, or they're close to take them out to show them what is worth protecting. What we did, as I said, when the interim report came out, is during a daily basis when we had our passengers on the tour, we simply just asked them, what do you feel about fracking? Some of them asked what it was, so we told them, and they said, well, where would it be? And we told them that, and they said, well, yeah, we wouldn't be too keen to come up here if that was the case. And that was a little bit worrying. Of course, it may not be the case. They may have just said that because of the conditions, but the results for us, if they decided that they didn't want to come up here because of the fracking, then yeah, they would be out of business. That'd be the end of us. So the happy family would be gone. And so basically, for us guys, just a summary of what, if we can take something out of this, we do believe that the gas industry, unconventional gas industry, will have irreversible long-term negative consequences on all aspects of the natural and safer life in the NT and therefore reject it. We also find that given all the uncertainty deficiencies that currently prevail around the unconventional gas industry, it is disconcerting that had not public opinion been so forceful and demanded a moratorium on fracking, we would now be seeing this industry operating across most of the NT, unhindered without proper regulation, environmental safeguards, community consultation or care. Now, to believe that the industry would have acted in good faith in the absence of this inquiry and conducted business in a sustainable and responsible manner is unlikely, given the proponents of the industry rallied against the formulation of this inquiry and activities ushered in just prior to the change of government. It is our belief that there is a long way to go before those involved in the extractive resource industries gain the trust of all other sectors of the community, and if the unconventional gas industry were to go ahead, then anything short of a robust, comprehensive and effective regulation of the unconventional gas industry will result in widespread community action. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Woods. Thank you for reading the report and in detail. Your comment about the time period between the publication of the report and sort of preparing for these hearings and submissions is noted. Let me emphasise that you can, of course, put in a submission at any time to the inquiry, so please don't think that you're in any way precluded from putting in any further material. On that note, are we able to get a copy of your presentation?
Yeah, I think you've got one already.
Oh,
yeah.
Excellent, great, wonderful. I should also just note that coffee, with respect to the social impact engagement, coffee will be looking to the Queensland experience, and indeed we have just come back from a week in Queensland speaking to landholders and various government regulators and entities up there.
Thank you.
I'm just curious, when you said that you told people what fracking was, what did you tell them exactly?
In broad terms, went through the process of the different types of unconventional gas. Told them that the different depths, how it varies from the conventional gas as far as how you get access to that. And didn't go, that's pretty much the extent of it.
Again, I just want to, pardon the pun, drill down on that.
Yep.
But what exactly did you tell them about how it differs from conventional gas?
Okay, so essentially that, so conventional gas, we understand to be pockets of gas that has actually seeped out and creates, sitting there in a, if you will, a bubble. And so you're drilling down and you're extracting that without the need, or sometimes you do, as you said in your report, there have been cases where you do also break and frack some of the materials of that gas in and around that pocket of gas. With the unconventional, it relies solely and purely upon breaking the medium in which the gas is actually held, whether it's your shale, your coal, or your tight gas with your sandstone structures. And in order to do that, simply, yes, you're drilling your well, you're putting your casing, you're doing your concrete, you're putting your safety measures in place, and under pressure, you're putting a concoction of chemicals and sand and water and everything else down into that to break that under pressure, and then putting wells elsewhere around the countryside to extract that.
Yeah, thank you. And the reason why I ask is because it came as I think, a surprise to me at least, when having a look at some of the gas fields in Queensland, that a very small percentage of those are actually fracked. So on one view of how you define conventional versus unconventional,
yep.
A lot of the coal seam gas that's being pulled out of Queensland, in fact, is not fracked, and they would effectively be conventional gas.
There's not debating that at all. Yep.
No. All right. Yes, Dr. Beck.
Yes, Mr. Woods, thank you very much for the presentation. It was good to see that you had gone through the report, so that was excellent. During your presentation, I think you made the comment that you asked for any comments from the panel
yep.
in terms of the accuracy of the information
yep.
that you presented. I would have to say that any silence from us doesn't indicate confirmation of the data that you put there.
Yeah, I realise.
So I just wanted to make it clear that
yep.
You can't take our silence as confirmation.
That's fine.
We
mate.
haven't had time to even check it. So.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay.
Coffee at 2 o'clock this morning, mate. That's obviously they're going, right, what's going on? So, yeah.
No, look, it's a great presentation. We are very appreciative of it.
Thank you.
Yes, Professor Hart.
Could I just ask a question? As you note up there are uncertainties.
Yep.
There's uncertainties in most efforts of society. And that's obviously why we're undertaking a risk assessment and over the whole of this. I just wanted to ask you if from the tourism industry's point of view, have you thought about, if indeed the moratorium is lifted, mm-hmm. what sort of safeguards, regulations, etc., would make your industry confident that the risks are acceptable?
Firstly, I don't represent the industry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
it's only those members that have actually decided that they're ready to step forward and say something about this. I'd love to write a big long paper and give it to you at some point. Go and just do this, do this, do this.
Please do.
Why don't you?
Please do.
Okay.
As I said, it's the government's decision whether or not to lift the moratorium. Our job is to
yep.
Identify the risks. We've done that. Assess the risks. We're doing that, and then make recommendations as to those risks. Whatever, and I'll say this to anyone who's here today or listening, please, if you have recommendations, please send them in.
I think from the primary thing that we've got here, as I said, you've mentioned in the report, is the perception of the risk. The actual risk can vary, and who's telling the truth about that, and what are the consequences if you believe the wrong person. And in our society, we need to trust the government. We need to trust the regulatory body. But because there's so much uncertainty, historic uncertainty through the government, and welcome to the Northern Territory, there's a fair bit of interesting stuff happening up here, there is a lack of faith there. So before anything starts, before anything goes ahead, I think I mentioned it up there, that you have to have a regulatory body which is independent of both the industry and the government. And because, well, I don't have to explain it, I don't think. So it needs to stand itself as separate, it needs to be independently funded, it needs to have punitive powers, it needs to have enough staff to do its mandate, and it needs to have the reporting and transparency for the public to actually witness and see that they're actually sticking to what they're supposed to do, and that is watching over and ensuring that the industry, the unconventional gas industry, is doing what they say, that the guys on Friday afternoon aren't knocking off early to go to the pub and dipping out on the concrete. So this is what we need to do, and it needs to happen in real time rather than waiting 5 years, 10 years down the track. And there also needs to be a process where, and you mentioned in the report, access to justice. Not something that lasts 10 years, 15 years down the track, almost like a 2 strikes you're out rule where it says, okay, you've done this is not going to court. This is, you've polluted this, you've done this, you've lost your licence, okay, you're out of business. Too bad, so sad. You've done this, and you have to pay these guys off, and you have to fix this up. That's what we're talking about. And you have, not just in the Northern Territory, this message has to go around Australia, because that's where our people are coming from. You know, 500,000 or 600,000 people a year come here, they don't come from Darwin, they come here for a holiday. And so they're sitting down in Melbourne, and which is, you know, got the moratorium or somewhere else, and they're going, well, these guys got fracking, we don't want to go there. Oh, but hang on a minute. They've got the world's toughest and most transparent and fair system of governance anywhere in regard to this industry. And I'll take it one step further, across the rest of the oil and gas industry. I know this is not your scope on this inquiry, but it's all part of the same beast. So the people making the decisions about this aspect of it are still the same people sitting over there making the decisions about the oil and gas. So what makes it any more certain that they're doing the, subscribing to the proper regulatory processes in those aspects as well? So overhaul the whole system, I think.
Okay. Dr. Jones.
Yep. Mr. Woods, one of the things we can recommend in our report is this issue of no-go zones and so on. You raised this issue of some very strong traditional owner perspectives there about their view of the land, and certainly areas like Mataranka and so on, arguably very, very iconic and need to be protected. Would you view a series of, if you like, no-go zones with buffer zones being an appropriate way of dealing with this, or is this a generic territory-wide thing where the whole territory is iconic and...
Assuming, I mean, we live in the modern world, so we can't put everything off bounds, can we? So, but the no-go zones, and they need to be catchment scale based rather than local based. And so if you're going to protect, Mataranka Hot Springs, it doesn't do to have a 400 metre, 500 metre exclusion zone. You've got to protect the aspects that contribute to the integrity of that system. And so that's where you, that's what you've got to, if you're serious about it, that's what you have to do. Otherwise, you might as well not bother. And that's not from a many, that's just from, what's happening in the ground and everything else.
Well, I guess what I'm coming from the point of view of the tourism industry, there are clearly tourism and fishing hotspots around the Northern Territory where a lot of tourists go and where you take them.
Well, okay, so at the moment, the Territory Government and everybody up here is obviously trying to increase the number of tourism visitations and looking at new markets to come to Darwin. With those new markets, obviously new products will be evolved. Now, if you look at what we've done so far in the Northern Territory, you have Kakadu, you have Central Australia, you have Wataki, you have the Mataranka, Litchfield, you've got all these places. You've got Gregory National Park as well, which is underutilised. But we've also got a lot of areas out there which fit into the niche tourism sector, which hasn't been developed yet in the Northern Territory, hasn't really been scoped out. And we're talking, I mean, I know it's offshore, but if you look at the coastal values of the Northern Territory, these are unsurpassed. One of the most least developed coastal areas in the world we've got up here along the coast of the Northern Territory. And if I think from one of the reports I read, it was a case that to make the gas industry profitable, it's you're talking about petrochemical industries and all the rest of it up here in defence and blah blah blah. And it's like, well, there goes this unique, untouched, new tourism experience. Now, getting out into the bush, getting out into the outback. You've only got to go, I don't know if any of you have, I know you've actually done the field experiments, but actually gone out for a bit of a holiday in some of these places and done a bit of off-road stuff. You're coming across magic spots all the time. And so as the tourism numbers increase, we've got the potential, because of these little bits and pieces all over the joint, to take people here, increase our tourism dollar, and increase visitation. So I don't think broad-scale exclusion is the answer. But I do think, and once again, across the Northern Territory, we have a lack of baseline data about our basic environmental attributes up here. And before we go too far ahead, why not do a large-scale, micro investigation of the qualities?
Kind of a values identification of these areas.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, you're looking at places like Litchfield, Kakadu, the national parks that are already in places and the reserves that are already in place. I think it'd be madness to step back from those, because they have had, in the case of Litchfield, since 1986, that many years of park management. Even if you were to find, and you won't, to find that it doesn't meet whatever values you want it to meet, it's still in probably a better park condition than a lot of places out there. So you wouldn't take them back. If anything, you'd be adding areas to it. But once again, you asked how you could mesh the tourism sector with the oil and gas industry or the unconventional gas industry. I think there is a sustainable future, but we do need to work together and be smart about it.
Rachel?
Yes, Professor Priestley.
The panel has had opportunity to do some site visits on areas where the gas industry is rolled out, particularly in southeast Queensland. And I appreciate that there are differences between the operations of coal seam gas recovery and shale gas recovery, and obviously differences in the tourism industry, those areas as well. Do you have any information on whether or not rollout of the gas industry in places like southeast Queensland has actually had an impact on tourism there?
I do, but I'm not prepared to. I'm not going to go to the table on that here. I'm not, actually some of the slides I took out this morning, just to get it back to 15 minutes, dealt with the Queensland situation and the matrix of cost versus benefit for the communities that followed from those developments. If you want, I can get those to you.
Yes, please.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yep.
Definitely.
Yes, Dr. Ritchie.
One of the things, sorry, Mr. Woods, that one of your, I think, powerful bits of evidence is the photo, you know, and the visual, the change in the visual amenity of the landscape. You walk off the top of Mount Brockman and you see the Ranger Open Cut. It's been there right from the beginning of the park, and Kakadu is still a World Heritage Park. There's no real evidence that I've ever heard that the Ranger Open Cut has affected that, and in some ways the juxtaposition of that with the 20,000-year-old rock art up in the cliffs just kind of works. Now, I suppose that's just as a preamble, but do you think that there's any tourism operations down in that Beetaloo Basin, flying over, helicopter, that sort of thing, that would be affected if, so long as there were setbacks from the highway, that the kind of footprints of well pads would actually really make much difference?
The motivations for people to go on holiday vary, and so it depends on who their target market was and who their clients were in those helicopters. And so that would determine, if or not, well pads out here would upset people. You get people coming to the Northern Territory who like doing big game safaris, who have got lions and elephant heads sitting back in their trophy room. They're not going to care if there's a bit of, the fracking industry is there, okay? But once again, that's a small market. But so I don't know who's doing those helicopter tours. I do know, going back to the preamble with the Ranger one, because once again, we get a lot of people who go to Kakadu, obviously do Kakadu tours as well, and talking to passengers afterwards when they do the flights over, they are amazed at the size and just the visual scar that Ranger leaves in that landscape, and not a single one of them thinks it's a positive. All right, okay, that's a given. Saying that, and I'll give these places their due. When we started our tours, we were going to Rum Jungle uranium mine, okay, and people asked us, why do we go there? And I said, because it's there. This is the reality of it. This is where the uranium industry started, and it is a story to tell people, because not all mines are like that. Not all mines are bad, but some of them do lead a legacy. And I found that, as I said, it's all part of trying to give people the picture of what is out here. So in places, I think that a negative can be a positive, because it reminds us that we do live in the real world and there's a consequence for our actions. Saying that, too many negatives makes for a very bad day.
Yes, Dr. Smith.
I'd just like to tease that apart a little bit further, because I think David's question was quite pertinent. And although we're concerned with potential for shale gas industry across the Northern Territory, the likely start is going to be in that semi-arid middle third of the territory. So I've got two questions. Are you really aware of much in the way of current tourism operation in that area? And secondly, of that, how much of that makes or relies on access to temporary surface water?
Yeah, no, I don't know much at all about what programs have got out there as far as tourism, but I think you sort of hit the nail on the head when you just put it started. It's where it starts from. That's where the unconventional gas industry starts. And so the concerns, my specific concerns, obviously my area of operation isn't down in the region where the basin where they're looking at starting. But once again, going back to one of the earlier slides, was that 85% of the territory was under exploration application. And so there it becomes an issue for everybody. And so at this point, before the industry starts, I think it relevant to extrapolate the consequences of that industry beyond the microclimate of the Beetaloo Basin to how it would affect the greater picture. So yeah, I'm not aware of the operations, but yeah.
Anything further? Mr. Woods, thank you very much for coming today and for the considerable effort that you've put into your presentation. I'll look forward to reading those slides in a little bit more detail later on, but we're very grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.